We lost an engine, and there were fighters around, but they weren't really attacking our squadron. But I don't know whether a stray bullet, maybe just a hose flew off or what, but we lost our oil pressure on one engine. And so we feathered the engine, and we just couldn't keep up. We fell back, and we were the last one with the photographer on board. Then we lost another engine, caught on fire, and the fighters were attacking. And we were over Graz, I guess. I didn't know it at the time, but that's when they really came in from all sides. Then they had this Me-110, a twin-engine fighter with the rockets. I'd never seen a rocket or heard of one, but we could see them going by us, and they were the ones that really did all the damage. They hit our waist and killed 2 or 3 fellows in the back there, and it was a pretty bloody mess in the back of the airplane, I understand from what I talked to some of the crew members later. But that was about it. They shot all our engines off, or they quit, and then I was just flying almost straight and level. There's not much you could do, and our gunners were firing rapidly. The airplane was shaking, you know, from the gunfire. And all of a sudden, my controls, my rudder controls just went out. I had no control of that at all. And same way with the ailerons. So I yelled, "Let's go." And everybody knew it was time. Matter of fact, I found out later, more than half of them were already out of the airplane. Our wing was on fire, and a couple engines were on fire. We had to go up through the hatch, and we're lucky our airplane had that top hatch, because they all didn't. And that's where we went up. My intention, I think I had seen somebody on top of the fuselage in the tail. So I thought, you know, being a little bit hesitant about the tail structure, my intention was to walk all the way back the airplane on top of that fuselage and jump off the tail. But just as I started out, the plane lurched, and I fell down on the right wing and rolled off through the flames. The whole trailing edge of the right wing was on fire. And I rolled off through that, and I must have passed out, because I don't remember pulling the chute. But I woke up, and I was being lifted up in the air by the chute opening. And the airplane was not too far off, and I saw it crash just, probably a city block from where we landed. Pete and I landed in this little open area in this forest. And he got caught up in the tree, and I landed right out in the open. I carried a knife all the time. I ran over and cut him down. After I cut him down, we were wondering how many got out. We counted the chutes, and I think there were 6 chutes. And they were quite high, 4,000 or 5,000 feet. So they had jumped down. There wasn't any need to tell them it was time to go, I guess. Everybody knew it. One fella, early in the mission, when we were first attacked, he had his foot blown off. We issued morphine to him. When we counted the chutes, we thought he had been blown out, but we found out later that they threw him out. He was alive when he went out, but he landed in a tree and bled to death. The tail gunner was killed in the turret. The ball turret down below, he was killed just getting out of his turret. I don't know how he knew, but the photographer told me that he took a rocket right in the midsection, and he had skin and blood all over his boots when I saw him afterwards. The worst one was the nose gunner, who had he had his turret over to one side. And it was shot out. The controls were shot out. The bombardier tried to wind him back in mechanically, and it couldn't do it. So he died screaming. He was in the airplane when I left.
The last mission I flew, it was a long one. It was 12 and a half hours in the air, and that's quite a time for a bomber. And we flew to Poznan. But on the way, one of the fighters that was escorting us called us and said that he was getting oil on his windshield from one of our engines, and one of them had sprung a leak. I think it was a leak from a broken oil line rather than being shot, you know. We couldn't keep up. But about that same time, a bunch of fighters attacked us. There were Me-110s, which are twin-engine fighters. But we had to drop back. We couldn't keep up, and they hit us pretty hard. And the pilot put the thing in the dive, and the co-pilot reported later that they had exceeded the red line quite a bit. As we were just hedge hopping over fences and trees, and we lost another engine that couldn't get feathered, so it also was windmilling. We had two engines windmilling on one side, and it just barely could stay in the air. And some of these fighters that were attacking were still the Me-110s, and some of them had a rear turret, and if they attacked you and then peeled away, then the rear turret would come into action. And the last one that did that finally peeled away on my side, and he was fairly close. And of course, I riddled him in the end, and he crashed into Oak Grove and exploded in flames. And shortly after that, the aircraft wouldn't stay up anymore, and we finally had to set it down. He put it in a field. He took out some fencing, and it stopped just short of a grove of trees. We were lucky that we didn't go on into them. Everybody got out of there and ran. One of the engines was smoking for quite a bit, and we didn't know but what it might burst into flame at any time. And we probably ran out like maybe 100 yards from the plane, and we all stopped in a group and trying to figure out what to do next, you know. And then here came a half track with a 40 millimeter turret on it. It had a bunch of 40 millimeter cannon, and they, of course, came over the knoll, and they immediately pointed their cannon at us. And of course, at that point on, we knew where we were going. And it turns out that it was the highest loss of any mission, the worst mission ever for the 8th Air Force. And that's the one I got shot down on. It was on April 11th, 44. We lost, according to that, we lost 92 bombers that day.
It's daylight flight. We flew about 10,000 feet, and I got a direct hit and cut my airplane in half, and went into inverted spin. And I was able to get out, and my co-pilot was able to get out, and the two men in the rear bailed out. But the navigator and the bombardier were trapped in the airplane. I don't know if you know anything about a B-25. It's got a bottom hatch that you lift up, and then the bottom hatch drops out, and the ladder drops down. Well, when we got hit by flak, we were flying with some other airplanes, and I went into another airplane, collided with it. So I assumed that when we hit this other airplane, it jammed that bottom hatch. So these two men that were jumping up and down trying to open the thing, they couldn't get out. I went up the top hatch. The B-25 had, the tech orders said that in case of danger of, you had to bail out to use the bottom hatch. The top hatch was to be used only for ground escape. And I'd always maintained in my own personal view is that if I have to get out of this doggone thing, it says I'm going out the top hatch. I've maintained that's the way you go, and I had practiced it in my mind many, many times. So when the time came, it was automatic. When I was going down, I knew I was going to be captured. At first, I thought of pulling down the shrouds and trying, because I knew I wasn't too far from the front. And I got to think, well, if I get too far over, they probably start shooting at me. So I just gave that up, and then I got my wallet out and started going through it, see what I had in it. And the only thing I had that might be of any interest to the Germans was they used to call a short snorter dollar bill. It's something people started then. You have a dollar bill and you have all your friends sign it. They call it a short snorter, and you have to keep that on your hand. And if you were at the bar and it asked if you had a short snorter, if you didn't, you had to buy the drinks. So I got rid of that, and then I had my immunization record in my wallet, and that had my squadron in it, so I tore that up. So when I came down, the only thing I had was my wallet and I think a cigarette lighter and some cigarettes and a pencil.
If the bombers had dropped their bombs and were returning, then they'd get in formation and line astern, and they'd go into a circle. And the only way you could get at them was to go into their circuit, get your shot away, and get out before one of their other bombers shot you. And that's what happened to me. When I got hit, I was just still in the channel, and I thought maybe I can reach the coast. And I just got to the coast, and I pulled back on the stick. Nothing there, and I went straight in. But as I said, I had put the hood back and undid my harness to jump if they started to shoot at me. But so I was so damn lucky even then. It just hit the ground on an angle, and I was catapulted out into this garden of the hospital. Just unbelievable.
One engine got a hit, started losing oil, and I don't remember if it was in that engine or another one, the fire started. I don't know if they got that one out or not. And apparently the underside of the 17 was pretty well shot up, sort of dropped out of the formation and started losing altitude. And wasn't too long till the pilot rang the bailout bell. And that was it for that mission. We were told to free fall because occasionally German fighters shot guys falling in a parachute, and I didn't look forward to anything like that. Plus, you didn't want the people on the ground to see you, so just free fall, which I did. And of course, had no experience at doing anything like that, so was falling on my back, and it was kind of hard to see the ground. Anyhow, I went storming through the 10,000-foot cloud layer, if that's what it was, and the navigator didn't tell me or tell us or didn't know there was another one at 3,000 feet, and I went through that at 130 miles an hour. Got down where I could pretty well see what grass looked like, so I pulled the ripcord. I didn't get much of a ride. I hit the ground pretty fast.
It was another Berlin raid. Beautiful day, undercast, and we flew into the target and out. And we didn't see a German fighter in the sky. And so 4 of us were coming back together, and we'd been about 2 hours back from the target, and I saw a B-24 down on the cloud deck, and the Germans had a trick of, they get a lone bomber down there and they'd get in the clouds and come up and shoot at them and then get back in the clouds. And so I called them in and suggested we go down and take a look at them, and we did, and they waved us off and said they were okay. And we started to peel away, and just about then flak started coming up from the ground, and I was flying tail end Charlie. And as I peeled away, I got a burst underneath me that blew holes in my wings, and I was sitting in the middle, but I didn't get hit. And then another one came up and went right through my engine. hole appeared about that big right out in front of me. And I tried everything I could think of to keep the engine going, which of course would be impossible. And I'd always said I'd never bail out. I'd grab a hold of the biggest piece and fly it down. And I fully intended to do that. I started down with the other 3 guys escorting me, and got down just about to the cloud deck, and my cockpit began to fill with smoke. And I could see fire coming up out of the hole. And I decided it was time for me to go. So I bailed out, and my civilian flying saved me on that. In my training anyway, nobody ever told us how to use a parachute. We never had any practice jumps or anything else. But I'd had a civilian instructor who told me, if you ever have to use a chute, hook your left thumb in the ring before you bail out, because you can always find your other hand. And if you're trying to grab for it while you're going through the air, sometimes you can't find it. So I had done that, and as I left the cockpit, I kind of banged my shoulder, my right shoulder against the tail, and this arm was paralyzed. So I couldn't lift it up to pull my ripcord, but I already had a hold of it, so I was able to pull it with my left hand and get the chute open. I was about 2,000 feet when I went out, so I didn't have a lot of time, and didn't have too much time to try and figure out where I was. We didn't have any idea approximately where we were in relation to the coast, but we didn't know, where we were, and I was trying to see if I could identify anything to walk toward after I hit the ground. I thought I saw the Zuider Z. It turns out I didn't, but that's what I thought. I was going to head for them, but I didn't get very far.
We'd dropped our bombs and heading back, and here come the fighters. And there was plenty of them. And you'd get a shot at one, and you could only have time to get a burst because you just see them in a flash, it's that quick. All hell broke loose up there. I could see planes getting blown apart, and I could feel it, the plane shudder, and I looked out, and one of the twin stabilizers had a hole on it big enough to crawl through. So I hit the mic and I called the pilot, and I said, "This waste gunner to pilot, this thing's falling apart." He says, "Get off the interphone, I can't fly this thing and listen to you." And I said, "You're not going to fly it very long." So he sent the engineer back, and I can still see the expression on Staley's face. So he no sooner got back in the cockpit and he's prepared to bail out, so that was it. We all did get out of the ship. I can remember the first thing that struck me, I could hear the chute go pop, because I got in position, so I was free-falling pretty good. But it felt like it pulled me back up for a bit. But the first thing that startled me was the quietness. It was just shocking. It was so quiet. And then pretty soon I heard an aircraft approaching real fast. And I looked all around. Pretty soon I spotted this P-38 coming toward me. I could tell by his twin booms, And he circled me, and I can still see that guy holding his hand up like that. And in other words, "You okay?" I signaled back, and he gave me a salute, and whoosh. I can remember that very vividly.
Well, we were going into the ball bearing plant at Schweinfurt, and it was pretty tough going. We had fighter sweep ahead of us, and then a fighter sweep at the target, but only lasted a few minutes. and then a fighter sweep on the way home. Well, the Germans, they knew all that. So they just waited till the sweeps were over, and then they sent up the fighters. So our fighter sweep wouldn't get anybody, but they'd come up bristling mad when the sweep was over. And so we were heavy flak, being shot at from every direction. And I don't really know what happened, except some people in our squadron that saw us get shot down said that it was ME-262 shot a rocket at it. Said, well, I knew they were doing that, but they said one of them rockets shot us, and that was damn. When they were shooting rockets at you, they're about a half mile away instead of 600 yards. So that's a way I understand, but I don't know for sure, was that we got hit with one of them rockets. And then it was obviously a lost cause, and the pilot was losing it, and so they jump out, and I had the last shot that they hit us with had concussion had blown me back against the bulkhead and unplugged my oxygen and my intercom system. And I was a little while, when I finally come to, I realized I didn't hear anybody and my oxygen thing wasn't moving. And so we were only 18,000 feet that day. So I went back to the cockpit, and I was the only guy on that airplane. Everybody else had jumped out. And so I run back and snap my parachute on and jump out. When that parachute opened, you could hear M50 calibers and stuff. You could hear them, just making a hell of a racket. And then pretty soon it kept getting fainter and fainter and fainter. And then the noise went away. And it didn't look like you were falling. It looked like you were going up, really. But you know you were falling. And they had this big thing that they'd been trying to stop. Was the Germans were shooting Americans in parachutes, and the Americans were shooting Germans in parachutes. And both sides were trying to stop it. So here come two ME-109s right at me. And they kept getting closer and closer. When they got almost up to me, they reared up like that and circled right tight around me, and both of them saluted. So I saluted, and they went away. And then when I come down, I heard you could guide them damn parachutes, but I couldn't guide mine because one of my arms was shot up too bad. And so I just landed in second growth timber, and was no harder than jumping off the bed.
One day I had a new flight commander, Paddy Cameron, I think his name was. He said, "Mo, you're doing this all wrong." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You go over at 5,000 feet. I said, "Boom, they'll be waiting for us. They'll know we're coming." I said, "This way." "No," he said, "Come on with me tomorrow. We'll do it." I said, "Okay." That was my last operational flight. I didn't go back. But I came down with some barges, and I knew I got hit. I could feel it. I could feel it right there. And it sort of ruined things a little bit. I think it hit some of my damaged things in my empennage, because I got up all right and was more or less steady. It was only two 109s who were waiting for us, came and finished me off, set me on fire. So then I decided I better get out, and so that's what I did. I was smoking, just about, actually when I got out, and I could hear the shells exploding or burning in the plane way down below me. I jumped about 900, 1,000, over 1,000 feet, and parachute worked. They always told us, the girls who packed the parachute said, "Now remember, if it doesn't work, you can bring it back and we'll give you another one." But this one worked.
We came right back over to target the second time at 215 miles an hour in a 6-plane formation. Same formation we flew the first time over. And we didn't luck out that trip. Lost 2 on one side, one right after the other. 6W right ahead of us went down, took a direct hit, and then evidently those guys had a spot there, and the minute we flew into that same spot, why they took us with an 88 and blew our left engine off. We pulled out of formation. The other guys, I learned later, went almost straight down. But we got out of there, and they leveled her up, and we lost our hydraulic system, electrical systems, and pretty much. And by that time, my Fig said there's no way she's going to stay in the air. But while it's still in the air, I think we better get out. So I was wearing a chest pack, which I'm thankful for because it didn't want to open. And as I was coming down, I kept fighting it and pulling on it. And finally, I got the handle, but it just pulled the wire straight out, and it didn't open the. When the wire pulls, it's supposed to open the parachute, the canvas around it. Well, it didn't do that, and it was still not out. So anyway, then by that time I had gloves on, but I was working at it. Finally, it peeled off a corner enough to where it would open, and I don't know how far I'd fallen. Free fell for quite a while. As soon as I saw the tops of the trees, you hit the ground the same instant. I mean, then you realize when you're down even with something, you realize just how fast you are going, because the last 50 feet was before I could blink.
And I told Thomas to change course at this point, which we were going to do, and we got our time right, everything was fine. And then we got this terrible explosion, and we realized we'd been hit. We often wondered, of course, what it was like to be hit. No one could, you had to have it in the back of your mind. We knew damn well we'd been hit. And he blew our ailerons off. I lost control of the stick completely. And then he took another crack at us, and he caught my starboard engine on fire. And by this time, I'd lost control, and the airplane was going to turn over because I'd lost the aileron controls. Anyway, I lost any control on the stick. I told Thomas to get out. And there's a little hole in the floor of a Mosquito, which you have to pull up and then push down and then go down through it. You know, lots of time to do this thing, particularly if you're being shot at. Thomas, who was a relatively small man, got out. And I don't know what time it was after that. I came to. My parachute was pulled. I was alive and suspended. And it was damn cold. But I was alive. And I don't know how I got out. I jettisoned the hood, but there really isn't room for a man in a parachute and a dinghy to get out there. I didn't go down through there because you can't get out of your stick in the way. I didn't go down through there. So whether the aircraft blew up and blew me out with it, I don't know. And the other interesting thing about it, that I did not have my pull in my hand, but my parachute was pulled, and I was alive. So there we go. 20 minutes later, I hit the ground in Holland. So that's basically what happened. It was the most interesting trip of my life, that 20 minutes, as you can imagine.
Oh, well, I was going after some trucks and dove in there, and I got hit by a 20 millimeter. So I was pretty low down, but I managed to get up. And I managed to get out all right. So we watched our wing commander, who was a Norwegian, Erik Habjørn. We were going into France one time before the invasion. They're right on the deck, because we used to go in so to avoid the radar, then climb up, dive over, and then go inland, see. Well, his engine quit right at the French coast, and he pulled her straight up, and jetsoned everything on the way up, and no engine, and he got his foot on the stick and jammed it, drove it. The airplane went like that, and he went like that, pulled the ripcord. I think he got one swing before he hit. And they got him out, you know, with a walrus. Yeah. So that was our method, and that's what I did. I started, and I didn't jam it hard enough, and I thought, ooh, I ain't getting out of here. So then I just drove it. And then I went out.
And I was sitting next to the bombardier, and I looked over and I said, Andy, I got a bad feeling about this. I think we're going to get it today. And he looked over at me and he said, Cookie, you son of a bitch, shut up, you know. And unfortunately, I was correct. About 12 or 15 miles from the target, we were attacked by a whole bunch of German fighters. In the first pass, I had the luck to turn around to look. The bomb site's here. My navigation table is here. I'm looking up, and all of a sudden there's a big noise and an explosion back up here. And I have a steel helmet on and a flak suit, and I feel the force of it. And I look down, and my navigation table is gone, just gone. Plane was going down. Pilot was badly wounded. We tied his arm up in just a few seconds, gave him a shot of morphine, and threw him out of the airplane on a lanyard. And he was out when he went out. I mean, he'd passed out because he took a 20 millimeter right in the arm. I come out of the bomb bay doors. I kind of lift myself up, and I'm looking at the co-pilot, and he's looking. I yell at him, or he looks around, and I say, "Come on," and he said, "Go on," to me, and now I know he was badly wounded when he went like that, and then the plane did something, and I fell out. I didn't bail out. I fell out. I just fell backwards out, and it goes from all this noise and smoke and confusion, and all of a sudden you're floating through the air, and it's quiet.
How did I become a POW? Along toward midnight on the 17th, we began to move a convoy of our trucks and jeeps toward Krinkelt, and then we were going to head right up on Elsenborn Ridge from the town of Krinkelt. We got about halfway between the little village of Meringen to Krinkelt. I suppose it was probably a mile and a half or 2 miles from Meringen to Krinkelt. We got about halfway there when our road came under heavy artillery fire. As the barrage changed positions, I had to leave the Jeep. It was getting too hot right there, and I went up on a slight hill and dug in. And I stayed there the rest of the night. And then on the morning of the 18th, as daylight approached, I saw a few other fellows moving around. They also had tried to dig in and just escape the barrage. So I went down and found about 20 guys, and we got together and we got a truck out of the mud. And we said, we don't know what's up ahead, except that we saw lots of fire and flame all night long in Krinkelt. The town was burning, and we didn't know whether it was occupied by the Germans or not. We did know that the town of Meringen right behind us had not been occupied. So we decided to go back to Meringen and see if any of our fellows were in there. And this was the fatal mistake, because unknown to us, the Germans had quietly moved into Meringen about 4 a.m. So we went right into the center of town, and then all of a sudden they opened up on us. And we piled out of the truck, and some of the fellows scattered into different houses, and some of us went into basements. And we held off as best we could for a while, and then the Germans brought up a tank, and they pointed a tank barrel into our basement and began to yell, come out, and hand hocked and so on. Well, when you're looking down the barrel of a tank and it's only about 8 or 9 feet from you, you don't have much choice when you have nothing but a pistol or a rifle with you. We had no choice. So it was come out or be all killed with one blast. So we came out.
And our sergeant said, we better get back to the command post, which was back in Hatton, because we're running out of ammunition and we have no way to stop those tanks. Let's go back and find out what's going to happen. Well, I said, good, let's do it, to myself. But then he looked at me and another guy and he says, Warren, you and, I forget his name now, cover us as we retreat to the city. So there we were with, I had a carbine and he had a M1 and there were the damn tanks coming down at us. Well, anyway, finally I looked at him and he looked at me and I said, they're getting awful close and they're almost there. So we took off. I think we had one bazooka shell left. And I decided I was going to hide, see if I could escape being captured. And so I raced up the stairs to the, I think it was a 4-story building. German soldier, he looked like he was about 15. And he was obviously very scared as I was. But he had a Mauser and he hadn't seen me yet, but I opened the door and looked around and I thought I better give up to him before he shoots me. So I did. I turned around and he grinned at me like a kid, you know, and I suppose I grinned back. Anyway, I put my hands up and he motioned me downstairs and we went down the stairs and out the door. And there was my whole company there, including the captain, seated against a wall because the artillery was coming in and they were taking cover behind the wall. And that's how I got captured.
I saw some Germans coming down the road. Looked like a squad of maybe, hard to tell, 8, 10 of them. Marching down there like they were going to mess. Weren't even trying to be careful. I don't know what they thought. Probably they thought they were far enough back that there was no Americans around, but I was the only one there. Lay down behind a tree and waited till they got up to where I could hear them talking, and then I opened up with them and found out I got into more than I really wanted. One of them with a 9mm machine pistol raked me across the shoulder. I was laying back like this, put 5 bullet holes in my jacket and a 6th one through my arm, and chipped that bone, and apparently did something to the nerve because I finished the clip of ammunition I had in my M1, but when I reached back to get another clip, I couldn't move my arm. It was paralyzed, and it was that way for probably 2 or 3 months. I finally worked on it until I got to where I could use it again, and I can use it quite well now. Anyhow, this non-commissioned officer kept motioning for me to put up my hands. He called out, "Rouse mit the hands loafing." I didn't know what it meant, but I had an idea what it meant too. I know what it means now. It means come out with your hands up. And there was nothing else I could do, and so I stood up, and when I stood up, I knew that I was a dead man. I knew, just flashed in my mind. I knew they were going to kill me because we didn't take prisoners, We had no place for prisoners. And so in retaliation, the Germans didn't take paratroopers prisoners. And so don't ask me, except I always figured I had a guardian angel that was taking pretty good care of me. And so I did and went back. And actually, right out there, they had a first aid man with that squad of Germans, and he patched me up. Actually, while another one was waiting there for some attention. And I don't know what, unless they figured they wanted me for information. That's the only thing I could figure.
They were firing just over our head. The squad leader was trying to figure out what to do, so we were spread out in a ragged line. We're firing back up at them. And then we began to hear, and I began to hear guys screaming for help. He was in bad shape. He was screaming, "Please help me, please help me." And I said to the sergeant, I yelled at him, "I want to go help him." I knew who it was. And he told me no. And then he changed his mind. And he did something very clever. I can't tell you if it was my plan, but he told the remaining 6 or so guys he had to stop firing. Cease fire. And they stopped. And he looked at me, and then he told them to commence firing all at once. And for a moment, the Germans were distracted. And by the time I hit the ground next to him, they had seen me get up. And of course, they laid it down right on top of us. We're here, and they were shooting about this high, so as low as they could get it. They did their best to hit us. They couldn't get the guns low enough. So, you know, as my wife were here, she would say, this will take him till Wednesday to tell you the rest of this. But the short version is I managed to get his pack off. He was shot in the back. And I did what I could for him. He kept asking me, how bad is it? I thought he was going to die in the next 10 minutes. I mean, he had blood coming out of his back like a fountain. Anyway, we got through the whole damn night because it was late afternoon when this happened. And they fired flares several times at night to illuminate the field. But you could tell about where we were because of the noise he was making. He never did pass out. And just about first light, there was a heavy mist, almost as high as this table, across this field. And the only plan we had left, and the wounded kid and myself on the other side of him, I kept telling him, Jerry, we're going to crawl out of here, you know, under the mist. They really couldn't see us at that point, but you got to be quiet. You can't yell out. You have to be quiet. Do you understand me? He said he understood. And so I had one hand, and the guy had the other, and we started crawling. We got about from here, maybe to that wall. 4 Germans with 3 rifles and 1 machine gun. Up! That was that.
We were quite close to the Yugoslavian border. You know, Graz is right there. And we thought we had a pretty good chance. So Pete and I started out. I wrapped his hand in part of the chute that I could cut down from the tree. And he was in quite a bit of pain, so I gave him my morphine. And we ran away from that area. Well, the ME-109 buzzed us 2 or 3 times. And we were afraid he was going to shoot, but he was just looking at us, I guess. And the airplane wasn't too far away, so he would just buzz in the area. And anyway, we tried to get out of there. We ran to get out of this open area. And we got into the woods and weren't very far in there. And we stopped and I dressed his wounds as best I could and gave him that shot. And then we opened our escape kits and tried to plan what we might do. We tried to go south and maybe cross the border there. Then we heard some noises, people coming up behind us, so we ran up into the brush and hid, and here was the rest of our crew that had been captured, and they were marching in front of us, so we just kept quiet and let them go. So we walked all that day, and then all that night, and the next morning, I don't know how far we got. It was mountainous territory. He was in a lot of pain, and we came to a house. We were up on a hill looking down on this house, and it was just dawn. And we stayed there and watched the house to make sure there wasn't any men around, maybe just women, or maybe it wasn't occupied. But nobody seemed to show, so Pete he carried, we were all issued a pistol, but I never carried mine. I had a knife, and I didn't know what good a pistol would do anyway. But he gave me his pistol, and he went on down to the farm to get his hands taken care of, maybe some kind of medication, and get some relief. So I sat there on this hillside watching the house, and he knocked on the door and went in. And then I went to sleep. And when I woke up, he was coming out of the door with an old man with a rifle in his back, a shotgun turned out to be. And so I figured we'd had it, except that they came towards me and then over to the left. And so I had Pete's pistol, and I thought it was quite an old man, about my age now. And he had this shotgun right at Pete's back and was marching him down that little trail. So I came in behind him, and I was going to hit this guy or knock his gun away, you know, and we'd take off again. But he heard the brush snap or something. He turned around, and he had this shotgun. It was over and under barrel shotgun, and he was shaking, and I could tell he was going to fire. So I threw my pistol up in the air and I lit the ground, and he did fire right over my head, and he wasn't more than 25 feet away, I guess. So and then I threw up my hands and threw the gun up in the air, and so he had two of us now.
I landed and thought, now what on earth am I going to do now? I gathered up my parachute, of course, and put it in a ditch. And there was a barn over there, about half a mile away. And I decided I'd go in there and think this thing out, because I wasn't going anywhere. I had to find out what was going to happen. And there was a Dutchman smoking a pipe, leaning on a gate. And I walked up to him and said, I'm a pilot and I've just come down there, and what am I going to do now? He couldn't even acknowledge me. He wasn't interested in me in the slightest bit. I think he was scared of me, actually. And so I walked to the barn, and somebody had seen me come down. And I was looked after by an underground group of people who brought me a bicycle and a raincoat, and we bicycled into Utrecht, and they looked after me for a week, when I was picked up in a curfew later on and taken over by the Germans.
That night I could see guys with flashlights looking for me, and German voices all over the place. And I got up later that night and walked down this road, and it was dark, no moon. And I was walking in a place for a small road, and around the bend came 2 or 3 people, and I had nowhere to go. And the only thing I could do was be nonchalant, and I walked past them. And I really think that I was whistling and they passed, and nothing happened. I didn't hear any yelling or anything, so I guess they didn't maybe they did, and they didn't want to screw around with it because they thought I might be armed, you know. But then I darted off the road and took off overland and slept. I had my flight pants on and my jacket, so I was reasonably comfortable sleeping out. I made the mistake that I would never make now. I knew where Yugoslavia was, but there was a big mountain between me and Yugoslavia, but I went up one side of the mountain and down the other, instead of following the watershed, you know, or the contour. So that is why I probably exhausted myself. But at the end of the 5th day, I'd had it. I was wandered down, and I saw this little shack and farm shack, and went in the front door, and we went to the front door and knocked on the door, and in my high school German I said, "Ich bin hungrig," and I can't remember, it was a man, I think, and he went like that or something like that, and came out, brought me a plate of milk, or some milk and some bread, and I sat down and I was eating it. But they had already notified, I think they sent their son out the other door and picked up what they call the Landwacht, the land watchers. And all of a sudden, a few minutes later, I saw these guys. I like to think they were in leather shorts, lederhosen. They may not have been. But they were walking out. I do remember they had 2 of the biggest rifles I'd ever seen in my life. And I said to myself, "Cook, you're not going to be a hero." And I took my .45 out, and I threw it as far as I could throw it.
And I came down, right, and the Germans were waiting for me. The first thing they said, "For you, the war is over." I think they take that in basic training. They're courteous. They didn't give us, we didn't get a lot of food. And of course, food was not a primary concern with us at that time. And of course, I had hurt I thought I'd broken a foot, but I just probably sprained it. And when I hit the ground, there was a pretty hard wind blowing and dragged me over the rocks. And I just wearing a short sleeve shirt. So I think this arm, I just tore it all up real badly. And when I got when they took me into Athens, they took me into a first aid station, and another very attractive young German nurse bandaged me up, and I still remember what she looked like.
I was shot everywhere, in the back and the legs and the shoulders and the arms and the face. So I think I could have got away if I could have climbed a tree or walked, but I couldn't. And so the Hitler Youth, you know, the 16, 15-year-old kids, the company of them came out. They were beating the brush for me until they found me. And they were pretty nice. And this German guard, the soldier that was in charge of him, he came up to me and he pulled his pistol out and stuck it right against my temple. And he said, "English or American?" And then, you know, you got to think twice before you answer that. You got to try to figure out who in the hell he was mad at. If you said English and he was mad at the English, he's going to shoot you. If you said American and if he was mad at the American, he's going to shoot you. But if you said English and he found out you were American, he was going to shoot you anyway. So he asked me, and I said, "I'm American." "Oh," he says, "scoot," stuck his pistol back in, and we walked leisurely out through the woods. I couldn't walk very fast because I had a piece of shrapnel about an inch long stuck in my heel. And we ate blackberries, and we tried to, I couldn't talk German, he couldn't talk English, but we got a few things out of it. And he was nice, and they put me in a car, little Volkswagen, took me to this Gestapo place up on the hill. Then the guy that was so nice, when he got up there and the Gestapo got there, he yanked the door open, grabbed me by the collar, threw me out on the ground and kicked me 2 or 3 times and cussed me out in German. I guess he was just doing that for the Gestapo's benefit. And so we sat there for a couple hours, and finally they said, you get that bus, and you go to the hospital. So I was the one that went, one of the 4 of us that went to the hospital. The only complaint really I had about the hospital was they cut out about 5 pounds of shrapnel without any sedative. And that's kind of an experience that you don't want to go through.
I was in the chute long enough to see there were people all around that saw me as soon as I opened my chute. So all my precautions didn't help much. But I continued to do what I was supposed to do. I tried to hide my chute and my boots, those fur-lined boots, got my GI shoes on, and ran into a little patch of woods and found a big rock. It was, I thought, about the same color as my heated flying suit, which is a dark green, and hunkered down behind that, and I thought, boy, nobody will see me, but they did. And a big German farmer, probably from the farm that I landed near, had a bead on me with his rifle. I really thought he was going to shoot me, but I held up my hands and he didn't. So that was probably the worst part of the whole deal, was having to surrender. Hold up your hands and give up. Fortunately, the big farmer came down, and a guy in a uniform, a young fella, showed up. He also had a rifle, and the big farmer hit me in the nose or face about as hard as he could. Didn't knock me down, but I think I just stood up because I wasn't going to go down. But that got me over worrying about anything, made me so damn mad. I didn't worry anymore. I was just mad. That's crazy, but that's what it was.
Oh, I rolled up my chute and stuck it in a ditch and turned around and started to head the direction I wanted to go, and there was a farmer there with a shotgun. And that was that. And they captured me, and my plane had crashed in the middle of a field not too far from where I had landed. And they marched me to a farmhouse, and I stayed there until the Luftwaffe came and got me. And from there until I got to prison camps, kind of a blur. I don't remember all of the details. They took me to jail, and then after jail, I don't know where I went.
I just sort of stayed in the trees in the countryside. And when I was trying to get down to the river to get some water, I was lying in a ditch, and here comes a German patrol, and I can see them coming, and I'm laughing. I'm thinking, oh yeah, I got nothing to worry about. They'll never see me. Because I'd avoided 2 or 3 patrols. And they decided to cross the ditch right where I was lying. So, that was it.
And they put us on a German half-track. The 12 of us, that were, out of the 25 that started that day, only 12 of us were captured. Only 12 got to that pillbox. One of them was killed. Some of them were wounded, and others helped people back. I met them coming back. So you know, a German half-track, that's all you can get's 12 guys on there, and then your ribs hurt. You're crowded in there so tight. And we sit on that silly half-track till daylight the next day. We didn't do anything to look for trouble. We weren't asking them to shoot us, so we sit there and done what they told us. And that German half-track got stuck in a big shell hole. And that's where we sat all night until finally a German truck come along, pulled him out. And so about daylight the next day, we were at the division headquarters then of the division that captured us.
And that was it. I bailed. I came on down and landed and saw a little young, probably 14, 15-year-old kid with a bicycle. And I said, give me your bicycle, I want to get out of here. Oh no, he said, too many people have seen you. The Germans are on their way here now. They'll put you in jail here tonight, but we'll get you out. Then the Germans came, and there was a miserable little Hauptmann, a captain. And this fellow said, where's your parachute? And I said, oh, it's over there in a potato field somewhere. And then I heard the first German word on it was Kartoffel. That's the German word for potatoes. And so, well, I didn't know where that was. And so, start to find it. Okay, they're going to lock me up pretty soon, so I shall go for a walk, and we'll walk on a lovely, sunny Sunday afternoon. That might be my last chance for a bit of fresh air, so I'm going to enjoy it. So I just started walking, and someone said, are they through the... There are no kartoffels here, you see, no potatoes here. And I said, oh, I don't know where the hell it was anyway. And this was translated back to the Hauptmann, and somebody booped me right in the behind, you see. Well, no one does that to Ivan. Boy, come around. Oops, up comes a Luger and cocks it. I said, oh, yeah. Yes, we we just behave ourselves, no, don't we?
Was on my knees to gather in my parachute, see if I could make a run for the trees that were maybe 30, 40, 50 feet away, and heard a gunshot. And so I turned around and looked and started to stand up, and about that time I heard a bullet go over the top of my head and hit the trees beyond. I could hear that I heard it zing. It was close, and I looked around, and here's this guy down there, and he's pointed right at me. So I knew that we didn't carry weapons on it. Our squadron commander refused to let us carry a .45. He probably, as he said, you'll just get yourself killed. And I would have to think at this point that that's probably about what would have happened if you're trained to pull out a gun and shoot back. And with a .45, you're not going to win that war. So I put my hands up and just stood still. And this guy come running up to me, and then I saw a couple other guys running, and they were only off maybe 100 feet, coming from two different directions, none of them in uniform. And when this guy got up close to me, I could see he was maybe a kid. He could have been 14, he could have been 16, but awfully young.
Here, we heard this guy coming down the hill, and we heard this noise, and it was this old boy. He had a short sleeve sweater like that, and sort of an alpine-looking hat, and he had this sled backing with a harness over it, or these, not a harness, that was some kind of a wood yokes. And he had this sled loaded with wood. God, there must have been a quart of wood, that thing, and he had big cleats in his shoes, and he was going down the hill with this load of wood. We scared poor guy. I thought he was going to die when he saw us. He just shaking like a leaf. Well, we finally could persuade him that we were friendly and all this. And we couldn't speak German, you know, but he could tell we weren't gonna. We got down there to where he's taking the wood, and it happened to be a baker where there was already 3 of my buddies were there already. They'd been rounded up. This woman there, and she could have been my mother, but she got us some soup and a little bread. I remember she come over and she brought a globe out and wanted to know where I was from. And I pointed out Washington in the United States, and she just shook her head. And then she went and got a picture of this young man. I'll never forget this. And she told me that it was her son somehow, and he'd been killed in the war. And she put her hand up on my head and ran her hand through my hair, and I could see the tears coming down her face. She could have been my mother. While we were there, heard the door open again, and here come this guard, and he had my tail gunner. And here's little Dom, and he's got his chute all bunched up here, and made him pack it in. Little Dominic says, "I found the partisans." I said, "Dom, this is the enemy."
From that jail, they took away our cigarettes and our watches and lighters and everything else they thought they could use. And then we stayed overnight there, and the jailer came up to us and went like this, like that, you know, and we thought they were going to slit our throats in the night, but they didn't. And the next morning, they took us out, and I've forgotten, partly train rides. I can remember riding on a back of a horse and wagon. We had all kinds of transportation, but they took us from town to town, and they would march us through the town, and everybody would come out of the store buildings and watch these airmen that were shot down, and we were horrible-looking specimens, you know. They seemed to get a charge out of that because we hit a lot of those towns. Then we had Dulag Luft, which was a temporary prison camp, and that's where they did their interviewing.
I had to be interviewed in a Dutch police station in De Bilt, and the next thing I heard was the door opened and a great big German officer came in with a big cloak on, and surrounded by people with hard hats and motorcycles and things. And I was escorted to the Amsterdam jail that night by motorcycles and sitting between people with bayonets all around me and hard hats and things. And I spent the night there, and then they I suppose it was only overnight. He interviewed me, and he happened to have been a man with an Eisenkreuz who had been in the merchant service between England and Hamburg for a long time, spoke very good English, and saluted me at Rotterdam and sent me down the Rhine to Cologne, Frankfurt, which was where our interrogation setup was. You knew that Dulag Luft was the interrogation center for all Air Force prisoners.
Put me in jail in Ghent, because I was just a few miles northeast of Ghent, and I spent a night there, and then a night in Brussels, and then I was taken on into Germany. And that's, we learned another German word too. I was at the one railway station inside Germany, just inside Germany. Maybe it was at, anyway, and I had 2 guards with me, either side of me. I was going to run anywhere. And people were mad. We're bombing in the middle. Nein, it's a Jägerflieger. I said, what was that about? Well, they said, thought you were a bomber pilot. Oh, no. It says, yes, we said you're a Jägerflieger, a fighter pilot. Oh, yeah, I must remember that. I'm a Jägerflieger, in case there'd be anybody else around here. But they were, all said, nein, this is a Jägerflieger.
They shipped us down to Frankfurt on the Main, I guess it is, and to an interrogation center. And they took us through Berlin, and we had made a mess of that place. And of course, we were right through all of it, And then at one point in Berlin, we had to change trains, and they had unloaded us, and that train moved out, and another one came in, and there was a bunch of construction workers on it. And they unloaded them and were loading us. And they're all carrying their hand tools like saws and crowbars and hammers and stuff. And they was very belligerent to us. And once you were in charge of the army, well, they tried pretty hard to keep you from getting killed by civilians. Many of the guys that were killed when they landed in parachutes, they were killed with pitchforks or rifles or anything.
Now, to their credit, once you were in the hands of the German Luftwaffe, they protected you. Because I was taken through Frankfurt in early June, or late May or early June of 1944, and there were a group of about 10 or 12 American flyers, obviously easily to recognize because we all had our flight suits on and our leather jackets. We walked along a valley of debris that was up as high as I remember it. It was hundreds of feet, well, it was miles long and at least 100 feet of debris. But anyhow, the civilians, once they realized who we were, and if there were several, a group of them, they would try to attack us to get us. And the German guards, there were probably 7 or 8 German guards, enlisted older Luftwaffe guards, enlisted men, and they had been given orders to take us from one point to another point, and they were beating these civilians off with rifle butts. Now, I found that just really interesting because in a circumstance in Seattle, if an enemy had bombed Seattle and the American Army was taking prisoners of war through Seattle that had just been bombed, I don't think the soldiers would use rifle butts on people. If they were, they would say, go to it, or but you have to respect that kind of discipline because the Germans were using rifle butts on these civilians.
Finally, this Luftwaffe guy that I was in the staff car with, he put me into a sort of a temporary prison camp that they had. And there was all kinds of Army, Air Force, what have you in there. And we started the march for the Seine. And it was quite a ways. It was pretty tough going. A lot of guys weren't in very good shape. So the word finally came back, keep on marching or you're dead. So the Frenchmen had these two-wheel carts, and they got in the tail end of the column. And as the guys passed out, they'd stop, throw them in the cart. And they'd keep on going, and when the guy got around so he could walk again, then out he'd get, because make room for somebody else. And then they get to the next village, somebody else would, he would go home, another guy. So it was, for the Frenchmen were pretty good. So when we got to the Seine there, they had these amphib deals, I don't know what you would call them, ducks or something. And they took us across because there was no bridges left, you know. But they got us across. We were in trains and marching trains, and we got to do leg lift for interrogation and solitary and all that jazz, you know.
And then eventually marched on farther to a rail spur. And then we were put in 40 and 8s, and they are designed to hold 40 men or 8 horses. They're much smaller than American boxcars, as you probably know. They crammed about 70 or 75 of us in there. You couldn't all sit down or stand at the same time. We had about half of us would try to walk in a circle, and the other half would sit. Then we'd change positions. And I found out later it took us almost 9 days to move 200 miles. That's how bad our planes had the tracks shot up. So eventually, well, we got no food while we were in there. They put in 2 buckets of water a day. And we did not get out at all for latrine purposes. Fortunately, it was cold, and all the excrement froze. If it had been summertime, it would have been terrible. But a couple of guys died in there. And the only thing we could do with them was stack them one on top of the other and use them for a seat.
Well, I would say really the worst 4 days of my prison camp experience was a train ride when I went to New Brandenburg, Germany. And we were on there from a Sunday morning until a Wednesday night. And there were so many of us, you couldn't all lay down at once. Some of them had to sit up. And that probably is the worst 4 days there. It didn't have hardly anything to eat. And of course, you used a cardboard box and go in the corner if you had to relieve yourself. If you ain't eating nothing, you don't go very often. And so that seemed like a terrible long time. But we were all able to walk off of there. We weren't that bad. When we finally got to our destination, everybody got off.
Second or third day, they were transporting us. They took us up to an air base, I guess it was a fighter base, and put us in this jail cell on the base there. And pretty soon one of the German guards come and he says, "Your comrades are coming, we're taking you to the bomb shelters." They took us outside and put us in this bomb shelter. It looked like a potato cellar. And my navigator was standing there with us. He was with us, and they'd captured him. And he says, "I don't like this one bit." He says, "Look at the sky, it's clear blue." It was at Graz, Austria. He says, "This has been our secondary target the last 2 missions." And sure enough, they hit it. And I'd hit the ground, and all this debris was falling on me. And so I made a dive and went over the top, and there was one of the German guards was standing there, and he had blood running down his side of his face. He evidently got hit with the shrapnel or something. And my navigator, Ed Mahoney's down there, and he's thrusting his fist up in the air saying, "Give it to him, boys, give it to him." And I thought, God, how patriotic can this guy be? He was quite a guy.
prisoner of war is always a source of information of some kind. Even if you don't talk to him, the uniform he's wearing, the insignia he's got, the kind of weapons he's carrying tells you something. The interrogations come in stages. The very initial interrogation, which in the German army could be done as low as the regimental or even battalion level if they happen to have somebody that spoke the language, was for immediate tactical information. The more focused interrogations take place up the line, particularly in the regular military intelligence units when you have trained interpreters and interrogators. And for that, they're looking at much more in-depth information. And there are reams of intelligence reports from Fremde Heeres Ost and West, the German intelligence organizations for the East and Western Front, prisoner of war information, going all the way back to and including what was your hometown like, what's the mood back there, you know, have you ever worked in a factory, if so, where? Stuff that is of strategic value, but really not battlefield information. But by putting this all together, you come up with bits that comprise order of battle information, which the Germans were extremely good at, as well as more general information that can be used either for propaganda purposes or to get more information out of somebody else.
Eventually we ended up in a place they called Dulag Luft, which is an interrogation center. Stick you in solitary confinement for, I don't know, it wasn't very long because there were so many of us coming through, they didn't have time to keep us. And then a real slick operator interrogates you.
And that's where they did their interviewing. And I was, well, I think we all were, in a little cell and solitary for 2 or 3 days before they started the interrogation. They wanted to turn me over to the civilians for trial because of the bombs that I dropped. And they said I dropped them on a farmhouse and I killed a man, his wife, and 5 kids. And I didn't buy that. But anyway, they wanted to turn me over to the court, and but they didn't. But when we got to the Dulag Luft, they had some P-38 pilots there that they had the film from the downed aircraft, and they had them, they were strafing airports, roads, you know, cars and things, and they were going to turn them over, and those pilots were pretty concerned. I never did hear what happened to them.
They took us down to Frankfurt, which is where Dulag Luft was. That was the interrogation center, and put you in solitary confinement. And that's where they try and find out all they can with interrogation. And again, because the 51 was so new, they were mixed up on what I was flying. In fact, the German records show that it was a P-47 with a question mark behind it. And they reported that there were 2 parachutes, and so they wanted to know where the other man was, and of course there wasn't any other man. And they kept me, I think it was 3 or 4 days trying to get that straightened out.
I stayed in the hospital about 6 weeks, and then they sent us to a place called Dulag Luft, which was the interrogation center. And the Germans knew more about our crew members than I did. Though they didn't know about me because they didn't have me listed as a bombardier. And so everybody else got to go out into the prison camp, and I was kept in solitary for about 6, 7 weeks.
You could always tell the guys that came out of solitary because they didn't stop talking. Everybody would just grin and say, oh yeah, he's just out. Oh, well, they would ask you all kinds of questions and you just dummy up. Name, rank, and serial number, and that's it. They would try and provoke you and all that, but they never beat us around.
It's quite interesting. This tall fellow, very austere. And we just landed in Sicily, you see. And he would come in, and he'd give me a long sheet of paper and a pen. And I would fill in Mowat, William Ivan, J17084, pilot officer. No, this won't do at all. This won't do at all. How will we notify your parents? How will your parents know that you're safe when a prisoner of war. I said, I don't know, but it must be done somehow, but I know that's all I can tell you. I just give name, rank, and number, that's it. Nothing else. Oh, but I said, no, I can't. No, I'm forbidden to do it. I just tell you that. I said, we were ordered to only, I don't disobey orders. Anyway, he'd come back, and then he died. He'd keep coming back, and I'd keep asking him, how were we doing in Sicily? And he would say, the Stukas. That was the only thing he sounded like. I guess that's how they pronounce it. Stukas. The Stukas, you see. And I said, but we're still there. And he'd come back in the next day, and if he'd ask me something, I said, how are we doing? He'd say, oh, but the Stukas. I said, but we're still there. So this is a great sport. I had lots of fun with it.
But it wasn't too hard, the interrogation. It was nothing brutal or nothing. They probably knew, well, they weren't sure, you know, and they didn't press it. So I was pushed through quite quickly, I think, that I was actually a flyer, which is what they were interested in sometimes. They want to identify you with the fact that you had been flying, that you weren't somebody who was a plant or a spy or whatever, that kind of thing. So as far as I'm concerned, my interrogations were relatively formal and relatively easy.
Most of the prisoners, Air Force prisoners, British and American, they didn't mistreat, and that's true for me. The only thing they did do is that while I was waiting for my interrogation, they marched groups of people one way past my door. I was in a small room, about 5 feet by 4 feet, 6 foot ceiling, and no windows. And I'd hear machine gun fire. And then nothing. And then they'd turn the light on. Well, I think I peed in a pan or something. And they gave me a little bit of food once a day. And it was very warm. God, it was too warm in there. And then, you know, every 2 or 3 times a day or night, there would be this clump of people walking by and then machine gun fire. And I said, shit, they're going to shoot me, you know. And I said, but if they try to do that, I'm not gonna break. I said, I'm an American soldier and I'm gonna die like a man, you know. I really, you know, I was nutty enough to really feel that way, but I thought they were gonna kill me.
We were all put in solitary, and after a couple of days, one at a time, they'd take us out and marched us up to a room where the commander, I guess, was at a big desk, and he'd try to ask you questions, and I think all the guys stuck to their name, rank, and serial number pretty good. In fact, a couple of them said that he knew more than they did about anything. But at one point, and I think he probably did this to all of them, he would make a little Luger out there, and, you know, and point it at you and ask you questions. And we all persevered pretty good. And of course, it was really a bluff, actually, I guess. I always thought it was.
He said, well, you will talk to me before we're through, I'll guarantee you. So he said, if not, you'll be shot in the morning as a spy. Just because you're wearing those clothes don't mean nothing to us. You know, you could be a spy and still be wearing an Air Corps uniform. So anyway, I guess he was trying to impress a kid. He did. And he said, you're not going to talk to me. And I said, well, you asked me all these questions. I don't know. I can't even tell you. I was only there in that outfit for 2 weeks. I don't know the name of the commander. I don't know the name. I don't even know the name of the outfit I was flying with. You know, I said, you picked the wrong guy to talk to. Go talk to the other guys. They've been there a long time. He said, I already have talked to them. But he said, your plane crashed but didn't burn, so we have the numbers, and I have all the information. Besides, he said, I have more information about you than you do. And he said, he commenced to tell me the day we left the States that we'd flown over. what outfit when we went to Italy, then over to Corsica, everything. He said, if you want, I can research it. I can tell you where you went to gunnery school and everything in the States. He said, it's all published in the paper. He says, trust me, we have records. That was our business. I said, then what the hell you talk to? You know more than I do. And he just smiled. He said, I just wanted to see if you'd talk to me because you're very young.
They knew my CO, they knew they knew the time that I took off, everything. And I just was amazed. And I never thought of it until afterwards. Then I thought, well, maybe some of the crew talked, you know, because with threats that they can make, you didn't know anything of value. And maybe somebody just told them. They knew the rest of my crew's name. But he was a little doubtful about Pete Skopik was his name. And he said, you're a bombardier, Sko, like that. And I said, Skopik, trying to lead him off. And then I thought afterwards, he's a lot smarter than I am. He knew what I was doing. Anyway, they did know they knew every name on the crew. They knew the CO. They knew where we came from, Lecce, the whole works.
He gave me the Red Cross form to fill out, and I put my name, rank, serial number on it. And he said, come now, Lieutenant Cook. He said, we know more about you than you think we do. And he said, you're from the 450th Bomb Group. And he said, your group lost 9 planes today, and your pilot was first lieutenant when he was shot down, but now he's a captain, and you know, he told me where I'd the only mistake they made, they thought I had transferred from the Canadian Air Force because I'd come from Canada. He said, you were in the Royal Canadian Air Force, weren't you? And I said, I'm not saying anything. And then he said, here's a cigarette. And I said, I don't smoke. And he said, get out of here.
You know, you say, well, name, rank, and serial number. He knew I was married because I was wearing a ring. So I admitted I was married. No use lying about that or trying to. Then when he couldn't get anything out of me, which he knew, I'm sure knew I didn't know anything, he told me some things that I couldn't believe. He told me where my folks lived. Yeah. And I forget what else, but hell, he knew all about us.
So he showed me a list of the people. That was the only way that I knew the man that I was flying with was dead. He showed me a list of the people and sort of, how's Hughie? How's Hughie Edwards? He said. He got a list of the whole squadron as to who we were. And he knew who was dead and who was a POW and knew a little bit about us. But I was no threat. I was just passed on through.
But they had a tremendous amount of information on me. When my last day in interrogation, he said, well, I wanted to let you know, he spoke good English, I wanted to let you know that the reason we've kept you here is we were confused about what you were flying. But we now know, and let me tell you about yourself. He told me where I went to high school, who my friends were, when I shipped overseas. He knew, he said, one of your friends that you played with in Walla Walla is one of our people. And he said, we have an officer, an American officer at the air base, and they had such detailed information on me that my mouth fell open. I'm sure I confirmed everything that they maybe didn't know by the expression on my face.
My Air Force number is AO404012. I remember that, and that's all. And they were very insistent, and I told them I can't tell you that. And finally, after a couple of days, they took me out of the interrogation area of the camp and into the main part of the camp. And a few days later, when they accumulated enough people to go to permanent camp, we got put on a train with some guards and taken to Stalag Luft, which was our permanent camp for over 2 years. Put us on a railway train, third-class compartments, about 30 of us. And they said if you agree to not escape in going from here to your permanent camp, he said it will be a lot easier. You'll have more freedom, and you can get off the train and you know, get some soup. At all the railway stations, they fed their troops, you know, with outside pots of soup, and they said you can get some food, you know, but if you don't, we won't do it, and we won't feed you nearly as well. And so none of us would sign the parole. So they took our shoelaces and our belts. And you can imagine trying to escape holding your pants up and with your shoes coming off. You couldn't do it. So that was probably a dumb thing not to take advantage of, but you know, it's the only way you can fight back when you're a prisoner, is just to be obstinate.
I was taken into a room a little bit smaller than this. It must have been a battalion control point, and there was officers in there with maps, and this German major or something. I didn't know the ranks then. I learned them later. He was shouting questions at me, you know, in German. There was a tank outside in the street. There was an SS sergeant out there working on it. They called him in. He spoke English. Pulled out his pistol, put it under my chin. I really thought that was it. I really thought that was it. And I kept saying, I don't know. It was a replacement. I came up last night. Finally, the thing ended after about 20, 25 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. And I think what the SS sergeant told him was, this jackass don't know anything. He said it in German, but I could tell his tone. Put his pistol back in his pocket, went outside and rode in the tank, and they took me out.
So they took me back to one of their headquarters, and two officers in there, German officers, spoke perfect English, speaks better English than I could. But at first they were kind of nice. They gave me a cup of tea and talked to me nice, you know, asked me questions, and I would tell them what I was supposed to tell them, name, rank, and serial number. Then the one left at the other, and he got a little bit rough on his talking. He said, you can either tell us what we want to know or what you know, or we're going to get rid of you. Well, I knew they were going to kill me anyhow. I mean, I had that in my mind all the time I was talking with them, all the time that I was in there. I knew they were going to kill me, so I wasn't going to. It made it easy. You know, otherwise I might have been tempted to have told them what I knew. And, you know, the interesting part about it was I didn't know that much. I could tell them approximately how many people maybe was in my company or something like that with no point to it. But I actually didn't know anything, so that helped too. But I knew they were going to kill me, so it was easy for me to be pretty cocky.
And then they questioned us, the Germans did. What outfit are you with? So on. Well, we all refused. Name, rank, serial number is all you were supposed to give them. But this guy, since I was one of the last ones to be interviewed, he said, who's your commander? I can't tell you that, sir. And he proceeded to tell me then what company I was from, who the commander was. He had every bit of information, questions he'd asked me.
Once they have prized all the information they think they can get out of you that's useful, then the interrogation process is essentially over. There's no such thing as a continuous interrogation because you're making things up after a certain point. So then it's to take you to where you're going to be held until the war is over for you, as they say. In Germany, that was usually done by rail because it was the most convenient and efficient method of transporting. But as the war ended its final phase, it got a lot more chaotic. And there were, especially from the Bulge, when there were huge numbers of prisoners to transport, there were trains that were stuck on sidings, strafed by the Americans, had to be unloaded and marched because the rail line was bombed, went to the wrong camp because the one they were going to they simply couldn't reach. And it became much harder to come up with a standard than it had earlier in the war, where it was a fairly standard process they developed from 1939 to 40. By the time they were taking Americans, it was pretty much cut and dried. And then it began to fall apart again by late 44.
So then we started the long trip back to the Stalag. We walked a good share of the distance through snow, and all he ever fed us was a hunk of bread, and guard would say, well, we'll put you in a train, a 14-8 boxcar here one of these days, but railroads were being bombed all over Germany, so they did put us in one night. They locked us in, several hundred of us in these 14-8s, and the guards, I suppose they went to the farmhouses or something nearby to sleep, and there were air raids going on all around, and yet we were locked in the damn cars. And we were scared to death that we were going to get bombed while we were locked in there. And we were lucky, some people did. And then they couldn't move because of the bombing, so we got out and walked some more. And I remember we were walking down through a little German town, and there's just a one-way, one-lane street going down through the little town. And up ahead was the beer hall, and as we were going by, this big heavy German came roaring out, and he saw we were Americans, and he started cussing at us in German and kicking, and he hauled the kid ahead of me happened to be in the wrong place, because this guy hauled back and really was going to let him have it, and the kid ducked his head, and the guy hit that steel helmet with his fist. And boy, that made him mad, but he went back in holding his hand. But they just let us go through, most of them. They didn't pay much attention to us. There were so many of us, and the war was going sort of against them anyway. I think most of them realized it.